haunting of Harper House. Have you ever stumbled upon something in your own home that made you question everything? Well, that's precisely what happened to me the summer I turned 16. It was a typical lazy summer in our sleepy little town. You know, the kind where nothing exciting ever happens, and the days just blend together. I was spending most of my time playing video games and hanging out with my friends, trying to ignore the strange feeling I always got in our old Victorian house. My parents decided to take a week-long trip, leaving me alone in the house. I was pretty pumped about it at first. Freedom, no rules. But that excitement didn't last long. On the first night, as I was lying in bed, I heard these weird noises coming from the attic. It was faint, like whispers mixed with soft thuds. I brushed it off as the house settling, but the next night, it got louder. I called my best friend, Mike, the next morning. "Hey man, you ever hear weird noises in your house at night?" I asked, trying to sound casual. Mike laughed. "Dude, my house is a new build. The scariest thing here is my mom's cooking. Are you hearing ghosts or something?" "Probably just old house stuff," I said, even though my gut told me otherwise. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed a flashlight and headed up to the attic. It was dusty and filled with old trunks and boxes. As I was poking around, I found a loose floorboard. Underneath, there was an old, dusty diary. Opening it, I saw the name Emma written in elegant cursive on the first page. She was a teenage girl who lived in this house over a century ago. Her entry started off pretty normal, talking about her life and family. But as I kept reading, they got darker. Emma wrote about feeling watched and hearing whispers, just like me. That's when things started to get really weird. I swear it was like the house was waking up. Objects started moving on their own, and I felt cold drafts that came out of nowhere. And those whispers, they got louder, echoing the words in Emma's diary. One night, I was in the kitchen grabbing a snack when I heard a voice right behind me. "Jake." It was soft, but clear. I spun around, but no one was there. My heart pounded in my chest. I grabbed the diary and ran to my room, locking the door behind me. As I sat on my bed, trying to calm down, I flipped through the diary again. Emma's entries were getting more frantic. She wrote about a malevolent spirit that tormented her, driving her to the brink of madness. And now, I was living through the same nightmare. I couldn't shake the feeling that Emma was trying to tell me something. Something important. But what? And why now? The next few days were like living in a waking nightmare. Every corner of the house felt like it was watching me, judging me. It was subtle at first, things you could easily dismiss if you wanted to. But once you noticed, it was impossible to ignore. The whispers continued. Sometimes they were just out of earshot, like someone muttering under their breath. Other times, they were clear as day, saying my name or just repeating Emma's words from the diary. I'd hear them when I was brushing my teeth, making a sandwich, or trying to focus on a video game. Always there, lurking in the background. I tried to keep myself busy, distracting my mind from the growing sense of dread. One afternoon, I decided to mow the lawn. The sun was blazing, the sky a perfect blue. For a moment, everything felt normal. But then, as I was pushing the mower across the backyard, I noticed something strange. The old oak tree by the fence. Its branches seemed to form a twisted, almost human shape. It felt like it was reaching out towards me, its gnarled limbs frozen in a silent scream. I shook my head, trying to clear the image. "Get a grip, Jake," I muttered to myself. But the feeling of being watched wouldn't go away. Later, I was sitting in the living room, flipping through TV channels, when I heard footsteps overhead. Slow, deliberate, they seemed to echo through the ceiling, coming from the attic. My heart skipped a beat. I grabbed a baseball bat from the closet and tiptoed upstairs, each step heavy with fear. The attic door creaked as I opened it. Dust motes danced in the beam of my flashlight. I scanned the room, every shadow looking like a lurking figure. Nothing seemed out of place, but the air felt thick and oppressive. As I was about to leave, I noticed something strange. An old mirror propped up against the wall. It wasn't there before. I was sure of it. I approached it cautiously. My reflection stared back at me, but something was off. The room in the mirror looked darker, more decayed. And behind me, I could see a faint figure. A girl, her face obscured by shadows, just standing there, watching me. I spun around, but the attic was empty. When I looked back at the mirror, the figure was gone. I bolted out of the attic, slamming the door behind me. My breath came in short, panicked gasps. I called Mike again, needing to hear a friendly voice. "Hey, Mike," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "You remember that diary I found?" "Yeah. What about it?" he replied, sounding distracted. "I think there's something seriously wrong with this house. I keep hearing things, and I saw something in the attic. It's like the place is haunted." Mike chuckled nervously. "Jake, you're probably just scaring yourself. Old houses make weird noises. You're alone and reading creepy stuff. That's a recipe for freakouts." "I don't know, man. This feels real. Like, really real," I said, my voice shaking. "Look, just chill out. Maybe stay out of the attic, okay? We'll hang out tomorrow and take your mind off things." I agreed, but deep down, I knew it wasn't that simple. Something was happening in this house, something I couldn't explain, and it was getting worse. That night, as I lay in bed, I heard the whispers again. They were louder, more insistent, and this time, I understood a word. Help. It was Emma's voice, filled with desperation and fear. The darkness pressed in around me, suffocating and cold. I clutched the diary to my chest, my mind racing. Emma's words were a plea from the past, and I was caught in her nightmare. The lines between reality and the supernatural were blurring, and I was terrified of what lay ahead. I woke up the next morning feeling like I hadn't slept at all. The house was silent, but it was an uneasy silence, the kind that wraps around you and squeezes. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was watching me, just out of sight. I needed to talk to someone face to face, so I called Mike and asked him to come over. When he arrived, I noticed how normal he looked, like nothing could ever disturb his carefree world. For a moment, I envied him. "Hey man, you look like you've seen a ghost," Mike said with a chuckle, plopping down on the couch. "I think I have," I replied, my voice serious. I told him about the whispers, the mirror, the figure in the attic. Mike's expression shifted from amusement to concern. "Dude, this sounds intense," he said, leaning forward. "Maybe it's time to get out of the house for a bit. Clear your head." "I can't just leave. My parents will freak out if they come back. And I'm not here," I said, frustration creeping into my voice. Mike sighed. "Okay, but you can't keep this bottled up. It's eating you alive. Maybe you should tell your parents what's going on." "And say what? That I'm being haunted by a ghost from a diary I found in the attic? They'd never believe me." Mike nodded, understanding but still looking worried. "All right, how about we hang out here tonight? Keep you company. Maybe if we both hear or see something, we'll know it's real." I agreed, relieved to have someone else there. As the day wore on, the tension in the house seemed to lessen with Mike around. We played video games trying to distract ourselves, but the unease lingered in the back of my mind. That night, as we were watching a movie, the whispers started again. Mike's eyes widened, and he muted the TV. "Did you hear that?" he whispered. I nodded. "Yeah, it's been like this every night." The whispers grew louder, almost like chanting. Mike and I exchanged a look, fear etched on both our faces. "Let's go check the attic," he suggested, his voice trembling. We grabbed flashlights and cautiously made our way up the stairs. The attic door creaked open, revealing the same eerie scene. The mirror was still there, and so was the cold, oppressive air. "Hello?" Mike called out, his voice echoing in the darkness. No response, just the relentless whispering. I stepped closer to the mirror, my heart pounding. The reflection showed the same twisted, decayed version of the attic. And there she was again, Emma, her eyes pleading, her mouth forming the word help. I turned to Mike, my voice barely a whisper. "Do you see her?" Mike shook his head, his face pale. "No, Jake, I don't see anything." I felt a wave of despair wash over me. Was I really losing my mind? I turned back to the mirror. "What do you want from me?" I shouted at the figure. The whispering stopped abruptly. The silence was deafening. Then, in a voice that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, Emma spoke. "Free me." A cold chill ran down my spine. "How?" I asked, my voice trembling. The mirror cracked, spider webbing out from the center. The attic felt like it was closing in on us. Mike grabbed my arm. "Jake, we need to get out of here." We ran downstairs, slamming the attic door behind us. My mind was racing. Emma wanted to be freed, but from what? And how was I supposed to help her? That night, Mike stayed over, but neither of us slept. The house was quiet, but the tension was unbearable. As I lay there, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't stop thinking about Emma. She was trapped, just like me, and I had to find a way to help her, even if it meant facing my worst fears. The next day was a blur. Mike left in the morning, promising to check in on me later, but I could see the fear in his eyes. He didn't know how to help me, and I didn't blame him. This was beyond anything we'd ever dealt with. I spent the day researching old town records, trying to find any information about Emma or the history of the house. It felt like grasping at straws, but I needed to understand what I was up against. As I pored over dusty books and yellowed newspapers, a clearer picture began to form. Emma had lived in the house over 100 years ago and had disappeared under mysterious circumstances. The townsfolk whispered about dark rituals and an evil presence in the house. As night fell, the house grew colder, the shadows longer. The oppressive silence returned, pressing down on me. I felt Emma's presence, her desperation, growing stronger. I had to do something, but I didn't know what. Just after midnight, I heard it again, the whispers, louder and more urgent. I followed them, flashlight in hand, back to the attic. My heart pounded as I opened the door, the air thick with dread. The mirror was still there, the cracks now more pronounced. "Emma," I whispered, stepping closer. "I'm here. Tell me how to help you." The whispers stopped, replaced by a chilling silence. The room grew colder, and my breath came out in white puffs. Then, in a voice that seemed to echo from the very walls, "Break the seal. Free my spirit." I scanned the attic, my flashlight beam revealing strange symbols carved into the floor and walls, symbols I hadn't noticed before. They pulsed with a malevolent energy. At the center of the floor was a small, ornate box, covered in dust and cobwebs. As I approached the box, a cold wind whipped through the attic, slamming the door shut behind me. Panic surged, but I forced myself to stay focused. I knelt down, my hands trembling, and opened the box. Inside was a small, ancient-looking dagger, its blade covered in dark stains. "Do it," Emma's voice urged, filled with a mix of fear and hope. I took a deep breath, my mind racing. I didn't know what breaking the seal would do, but I knew I didn't have a choice. I picked up the dagger and, with a shaking hand, began to scratch out the symbols on the floor. As the blade cut through the wood, the house seemed to come alive. The walls groaned, and the temperature plummeted. Shadows twisted and writhed, forming grotesque shapes that seemed to reach for me. But I kept going, driven by a desperate need to end this nightmare. Suddenly, a force slammed into me, knocking me across the attic. The dagger skidded out of my hand. I looked up, and my blood ran cold. Standing before me was a figure, shrouded in darkness, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. It radiated pure evil, and I knew this was the malevolent spirit that had tormented Emma, and now, May. "Foolish boy," it hissed, its voice like nails on a chalkboard. "You cannot free her. She belongs to me." I scrambled to my feet, grabbing the dagger. "No, she doesn't," I shouted, slashing at the figure. The blade passed through it, and it laughed, a horrible, chilling sound. The spirit lunged at me, its cold, shadowy form wrapping around me, squeezing the breath from my lungs. My vision blurred, and I felt my strength draining away. But then, I remembered Emma's words. "Break the seal." With the last of my strength, I drove the dagger into the largest symbol on the floor, twisting it until the wood splintered. A blinding light erupted from the symbol, and the spirit screamed, its form disintegrating into the light. The force holding me vanished, and I collapsed to the floor, gasping for air. The light grew brighter, filling the attic. And then, just as suddenly, it was gone. The house was silent once more, but the oppressive presence was lifted. I looked around, my heart still racing. The mirror was shattered, the symbols gone, and standing in the center of the attic was Emma, her form now clear and peaceful. She smiled, a look of profound relief on her face. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice filled with gratitude. As she faded from sight, I felt a weight lift from my shoulders. Emma was free, and the nightmare was over, but the experience had changed me forever. The days that followed were a blur of police reports and awkward conversations with my parents' Asians. They returned to find the attic in shambles, the strange symbols carved into the floor, and me with a haunted look that I couldn't quite shake. Explaining everything felt like trying to piece together a nightmare with words that didn't make sense even to me. My parents didn't know what to believe. They seemed torn between worry about my mental state and the tangible evidence of something terrible that had happened in our house. The symbols, the shattered mirror, they couldn't explain it away, but they couldn't understand it either. Mike came over as soon as he heard. He found me in the living room, staring blankly at the TV. "Jake, man, what happened?" he asked, his voice a mix of concern and fear. I turned to him, my eyes hollow. "I freed her, Mike, Emma's spirit, but it cost me more than I thought." Mike sat down next to me, silent for a moment. "Are you okay?" "I mean, really okay?" I shook my head. "No, I'm not. Every time I close my eyes, I see her, and him, that thing that had her. It's like a part of me is still up there, in that attic, trapped at that moment." Mike didn't have any words for that. What could he say? We sat in silence, the weight of everything hanging between us. Nights were the hardest. The house, though now free from its oppressive presence, still felt like a tomb filled with echoes of the past. I'd lie in bed, staring at the ceiling, expecting to hear whispers that no longer came in. The silence was almost worse. One night, unable to sleep, I wandered back up to the attic. The room felt different, lighter, almost peaceful, but it was still a place of horrors for me. I stood in the center, where Emma had appeared, and closed my eyes. "What do I do now, Emma?" I whispered to the empty room. "How do I live with this?" The air felt warmer, almost comforting, as if she were there, listening. I took a deep breath and left the attic, vowing never to return. Weeks turned into months. I started seeing a therapist, trying to make sense of everything. My parents hovered, constantly worried, but gradually life began to feel normal again, or as normal as it could be. One evening, Mike and I were hanging out at my house. He brought over some horror movies, figuring we might as well lean into the craziness. We were halfway through a particularly cheesy one when he turned to me. "Jake, have you thought about why this happened to you? Why Emma reached out to you?" I shrugged. "I guess because I found the diary. Maybe she thought I could help." Mike shook his head. "No, I mean, why you? There were others who lived here before you. Why not them?" The question lingered in my mind. Why me? It gnawed at me, refusing to let go. That night, I dug out Emma's diary from under my bed, flipping through the pages again. There, towards the end, was a passage I hadn't paid much attention to before. Only one who shares the bloodline can break the seal. It read, "Only family can set me free." I froze, my heart racing. Family? I scanned through the earlier entries, searching for clues. Emma had mentioned her younger brother, Jacob, who had died young. Jacob Harper. The realization hit me like a cold wave. Harper, my family name. Emma wasn't just some random ghost. I was her descendant, her bloodline. The horror of it sank in, and this wasn't a random haunting. It was something tied to me, to my family. I had set her free because I was meant to, because the curse, or whatever it was, had found its way down through generations to me. I closed the diary, my hands shaking. The events of that summer were no longer just a bizarre, terrifying chapter of my life. They were part of a much larger, darker legacy. As I sat there, the house seemed to grow colder, the shadows longer. I felt a presence, different but familiar. A soft whisper echoed through the room, sending chills down my spine. "Thank you, Jake, but it's not over." I looked around, my heart pounding. Emma was gone, but something else remained. Something darker, still tied to the house, to my family.